Everyone, this is Gene and I'm back with another video. So I wanted to discuss something that's related to comics but isn't necessarily about a comic itself, and it's how the industry moves forward, if the industry can move forward, in particular comic shops. Now, I will admit, I am not super knowledgeable of the behind the scenes business stuff, so I could be wrong. In some ways, I hope I'm wrong. But here are just some of my general. Excuse me. Sorry, I got a text. It kind of surprised me for a second. But just some of my general observations, having been that I've been following comics intensely now for a few years. First of all, I think we can all agree that the comic book industry is not going to be as it was. Everything is going to change. Everything is going to change. Like it, lump it, there's nothing you can do about it. And I think that this coronavirus has really shown the vulnerability in not just the comics industry, but in just businesses and brick and mortar businesses in general, right? And the thing is that for any brick and mortar business to work, whether it's a comic book shop, whether it's a restaurant, you need people coming into the store, patronizing your business regularly. And the coronavirus is showing us that when you don't have that regular customer base coming in and out every day, everything gets shut down, and it really hurts the bottom line, right? Right. It's one thing if you close for a day because of a holiday or something, right? People understand that. But this has been going on for what? At least a solid week now, if not longer, because different states are responding in different ways. Like, I can tell you that for myself, where I work, I've been in quarantine. Well, not quarantine. I guess self-isolation is technically the term, since the 13th of this month. That was the last day I went to work, right? But here's the thing. At least at the moment, where I work, right, while we're all greatly inconvenienced by this, we're not, how do I put it? We're not necessarily, I guess in dire straits as of yet, right? Because I work in a university, and many universities, many classes now are online and online options, right? So many schools these days work. You can physically appear in class, right? You can go to class, but you can also take online classes. Many people do both. When I was a student, I did both. I've done all three. I've been, classes only. I've been online only. I've been both, right? And so because I work in a college and we have that option, right? At least at the moment, I don't know what's going to happen. Things change, but it's not as if, like, for example, I'm destitute and can't work because of the coronavirus, right? Because what we did where I work is that we just moved everything online, right? Teachers have to, or professors, I should say, now can still conduct their classes, but they now have to do it online, right? Students can get their classes, but it's online. It's not a perfect answer. It's not a perfect solution, but it is a backup, right? It's a backup that we were able to put in. It was a backup that we already had because of the changing nature of education. So when this came down, right, at least so far, when the order in New York City to shut down and all non-essential workers have to work from home, for the majority of us, right, it's just been, at least to the people I've spoken to, and from what I know, the majority of us, it's just basically been in inconvenience, right? I can't get to my files, it's a matter of preference, right? But comic shops and restaurants don't have that luxury, right? They don't have a sort of online shadow system backup that they can rely on in a time like this. And those kind of businesses are essential What they need is constant flow in and out of people. And when the businesses are closed, right, they're not making money, right? So I don't know how the restaurant industry or how the comic book industry is going to be after this. I think honestly, in many ways, it's going to be on its last legs. If I'm being perfectly honest, I know it's doom and gloom, and maybe I've just been trained over the years to see the worst. But honestly, that's what I think. Maybe a few companies could bounce back. Maybe a few comic book shops could bounce back. But I don't see the comic book industry existing the way it does now. And I know that for a lot of people, a lot of people are saying, I don't want to go digital. I don't want to buy digital. I don't. They still want the comic shop, right? I'm going to be the Debbie Downer here. I think by the time this is all over, if not before then, it's not going to be a matter of I want. It's not going to be a matter of you wanting to go to the comic shop and pick up a comic book there, or you wanting to go to support your comic book retailers, right? If you have any in your area, they were a dying breed prior to the coronavirus. I think it's going to be a matter of you have to. It's not going to be a matter of I want to. I want to buy this copy of X comic at the comic book shop. It's going to be a matter of you're going to have to go online if you want it. And that's how I personally see it. I honestly see comic book shops and just print media in general going the way of Barnes and Noble, and I just see it dying out, right? Maybe a few comic book shops will survive, but unless they start turning to selling their current wares online, if they could do such a thing, I mean, even with that, you still need shipping, right? Because it's physical copies, so I'm not sure how much of an answer that is, but maybe afterwards something to consider. But I honestly think that comics are going to be forced, if not go completely digital, to go mostly digital. Because this virus is showing the vulnerability of print, not just comic books, right? But print media in general, right? Print media only works if there is a place you can go to buy the physical copy, right? If you don't need to go to a physical location to buy a physical copy anymore, then what's the point of printing it? What's the point of having a shop? Take a look. And here's the thing. Some people may be thinking, well, you're not a collector. I did not collect comic books growing up. That's true. But I did collect video game magazines. In particular, Gamepro Magazine. The very first issue of Gamepro that I collected was the September 1997 issue. September 1997, I remember the month and the year. And I remember it because at that time, Castlevania Symphony of the Night was this big game. It was this big return for the series. And Alucard from Castlevania is on the cover. He's the cover boy, right? I collected GamePro religiously, month after month after month. I had stacks of magazines for about 8 years. So 1997, I would have been about 12. So 8 years is like my early 20s, right up until I got into college. So for 8 years of my life, I bought this magazine on a regular basis. And on top of that, right, I wasn't the only magazine collector in the house. My brother also collected magazines because he was an avid gamer too. He still is. And he collected Electronic Gaming Monthly. He collected PlayStation Magazine. He collected Game Informer. So we had stacks upon stacks upon stacks of gaming magazines growing up, right? But here's the thing. As the internet became more and more accessible, the print media for gaming magazines died down and then died out because there was no need anymore. There was no need anymore to go to your local shop, which for me was a bodega, on the plaza, so it wasn't even like a dedicated shop like a GamePro, not GamePro, like a GameStop or whatever. It was the local uh, uh, bodega that would usually have them as I made my way to the bus stop to go to school. So as the years went on, right, and as the internet became much more accessible, and it became easier to get these magazines online. And on top of that, right, even before the advent of websites like YouTube and whatnot, and people making themselves into YouTube uh, personas and all this other stuff, and like make having a presence on YouTube, there were still these personal blogs and whatnot that people would write, where they would give their opinion about a video game that they played. Right? So now you didn't have to wait for a professional's opinion about it. You could just go online at any time of day or night, so long as you had an internet connection and a computer, and find out what someone like you, right, a regular gamer, no one necessarily special or exceptional, thought about this game. Now did magazines die out immediately? No, they didn't. But I did notice over the years as I got older, in particular when I was in my late teens and a few years later in college, finding print copies of GamePro and all these other magazines became harder and harder and harder. And GamePro themselves moved on to eventually having a website before shuttling it all completely. And honestly, as much as I hate to say it, I see print media, including comic books, physical copies of comic books in general, heading that way, because as digital becomes more and more normal and mainstream, and it becomes the principal way people access information in general, needing a place, right, like a comic book shop to pick up a comic book is going to become more and more obsolete. I think even if the comic book industry were in a positive place, this would be happening because technology marches on. I think it would happen slower if the industry was in a better place financially, but technology marches on, and people will always go for convenience, right? So I think that in general, this was always sort of going to be where they were headed. I just think now the coronavirus is going to hasten that death march a lot faster now. And I think the very few comic book shops that maybe will see the end of the tunnel on this, I think that they're going to become like Barnes and Noble. If that. I think that the current business model for comics, right, is over. I hate to say it, but I think it's over. And I know a lot of people are of a certain generation and they grew up a certain way, in that going to the comic shop each Wednesday is like this like ingrained part of comic culture. I get it. Comic book fans are collectors. They take pride in their long boxes, right? They take pride in patronizing their local comic shops. But here's the thing. Comic book shops, even without the coronavirus, right? Comic book shops were closing more and more and more each year. And the same amount was not opening. In fact, just some guy mentioned this in one of his videos, that if you have say 48 comic shops closed, but then 51 open, right? You've only really had an increase of 2 comic shops, right? That is not going to keep the comic book side of the business going, right? You need less closures and much more openings. And that's not what's happening here. That has not been the trend for the past few years. It's not as if these shops were like doing well, right? and they were plentiful, and now because of the coronavirus, they are like crashing. That is not what's happening. What's happening is that something that was already on a slow decline, something that was already on its way out, physical comic shops, like we hear about closures every year, more and more closing every year, and not the same amount opening back up, right? All these closures, right, were just showing that, look, it was just going to go down and down and down and down and down. Now, it's just going to get to that bottom ground. It's going to hit ground zero faster. It's going to hit it faster, and very few shops are gonna get out of this alive, right? It kind of reminds me of this line from the song Civil War. It goes something to the effect of and it wouldn't be luck if you got out of life alive, or something to that effect. And I think that's what's going to happen to a lot of these comic shops, right? It won't be luck if they get out of this alive. Or maybe it will be luck. But here's the thing. As more comic shops close and don't reopen, right, or they don't have a replacement reopen, more people, if they still want to patronize comics in any way, are going to have to buy them online. This is already happening. In fact, Nerdette's Newsstand, who said in her own video, and she says that, look, she likes to go to comic book shops, and I understand that. This is not shade, but I'm just using her own words in her own video. She said herself that she can't go to a comic shop near where she lives because there's no comic shop there anymore. The comic shop closed. So now, if she wants to buy comics, right, she has to buy them online. That's what's going to happen, right? This option of going to your local comic shop is dying out, which means that the comic book industry more and more is going to have to move its operation online. And again, I get it. People are very attached to the comic book shop. It's a big part of comic culture. It's a big part of the trade culture. I get it. I was a collector. I used to have stacks of Gamepro magazines. I used to have stacks of video games, drawers and drawers filled. I get it. But just as video games have moved online for the most part and are downloadable, and just as gaming magazines died out because you can just get the same thing online, a lot easier to access, much more convenient, and oftentimes cheaper. The same thing is going to happen, in my opinion, to comic books. The same thing was going to happen regardless to comic books. But the coronavirus is going to hasten that process. What may have taken maybe another, maybe 1 to 2, maybe 3 years, is not going to happen in a few months. And for those who are attached to the comic book shop, I feel bad for you. I do. But I think that you're going to be left out of options. I think that digital is going to be the only option left to you. This is not to say that digital is better than print or anything of that nature. I'm just saying that print is dying out. Print is dying out, and the only alternative to print, at least at present from what I can see, is digital. Right? All these print magazines, gaming magazines, things like Good Housekeeping, all that, they've gone digital, or they've gone mostly digital. Right, I remember seeing stacks upon stacks upon stacks of magazines of all various types, like muscle and fitness and all this stuff, in like spinner racks and whatnot when I was a kid, and I would go to bodegas. These days, in a bodega, no magazine rack, no book rack, no spinner rack. I'm sorry, but it's the end of an era. It's the end of an era. That's just the way I see it, right? It was a good run, but I think it's pretty much run its course. I see comics going, if not fully online, then mostly online. And to those comic pros online who are talking about helping the comic industry now, helping the comic book shops now, Where were you 2 years ago? Where were you 3 years ago? Where were you 3 months ago? When people kept telling you that they weren't going to comic shops and they weren't patronizing comic shops because of your piss poor comics. Where were you then? People like Eric Larson and Gail Simone and everything want to put out tweets about how they want to help and support comic book shops. Where were you all these years ago and all these months ago? Where were you then? Where were you then? You know what the best thing you guys could have done to help comic shops was? Writing decent comics. Because decent comics would have given people who have the option and the preference to go visit comic shops reasons to go visit the comic shop and spend money. But you didn't. Gail, you wrote Domino, and that was awful. I read it. Eric, you're writing Savage Dragon, which has pretty much become a porn comic, and not even a good one. So please stop talking about, oh, we want to help. We'll do anything that we can to help. Yeah, Eric Larson, you talk now about how you don't want to release digital copies of comics unless the comic book stores can get their physical copies and sell them. Yeah, right. You say that now. You say it now. Right? Let's see what you're saying again in a week or two when you need money, right? You want to be compensated for the work you put in. And the only way to do that is to sell the comic online in some fashion, whether it's through Image Comics website or Comixology or whatever. Let's see what you do then in the future. Because I don't believe for a second you are honestly going to hold to that. I highly, highly, highly doubt that. Right? It's easy to say that now. Let's see what you're saying and doing a month from now. But anyway, that's the video. Those are my thoughts on it. Please let me know what you think, and I will see you. Good Lord, the hiccups. I will see you. Damn hiccups. Here we go again. I will see you all on the next one. Have a good night, everyone. Bye.